Welcome back, everyone, to Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron. And again, we're joined by Jen.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hey, welcome back, guys, and glad Jen could be here again to finish up talking about the last 3 episodes of Moon Knight.
Yes, we're finishing up on the back half of Marvel / Disney Plus's Moon Knight. It's now all in the bag, or whatever the case may be. The series is over. There's a lot of discussion of whether this will ultimately be a limited series. Supposedly, folks from the cast and the production have said it's a limited series, but there's also been some speculation that maybe there will be another season, or that at least the Moon Knight character will be featured in some other Marvel project, but we shall see. So, reactions overall, last 3 episodes. Cam, I'll start with you.
Well, yeah, I wanted to first preface my reaction with a little bit of a disclaimer. I think I've mentioned this in prior episodes before, but I do want to say that I usually avoid critiquing or giving reviews of Marvel films entirely because I can't be objective about them. And last night, or the other night when we were watching it, you said I like everything Marvel, which is pretty much true. I mean, I can go back and watch Thor: The Dark World, like I've said, and still enjoy it. Obviously, I enjoy things to different extents, but I'm so invested in the universe now that I kind of feel like each one is just an extension of the other, and I just like all of it. But that being said, my reaction to Moon Knight is that it was pretty heavily flawed, and for every great thing it did in both structuring as a TV show and as an adaptation, there was a really, I thought, not so great thing. And overall, I think I probably agree with a lot of your critiques once we get into those, but I will say just the wackiness and wildness of all of it, and Oscar Isaac's performance, and just kind of seeing all this new aspects that we haven't seen in the MCU before kind of elevated it for me. So I was just picking out all of the positive things just because I love the MCU so much, and all the negative stuff is like, yeah, it's there, but I haven't seen an MCU movie or a show that I haven't liked yet. So this continues that trend as far as I'm concerned.
Well, me either, probably up to now. But anyway, Jen, what are your initial thoughts?
Truthfully, didn't love it. I'm glad I watched it. I agree there was a lot of flaws, and I can't speak from a production standpoint, but just the plot, the characters, I had a lot of critiques on it. I think I liked less of it than the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, I would say for me, overall reaction was this one didn't land for me, and picking up from where we left off in our last episode, I was really optimistic for where the series might go, despite a lot of the things that happened that I didn't love about the first half, and it seemed like it was going to go in that direction through episode 3. It kind of got into that Raiders of the Lost Ark and even like horror elements and kind of adventurous stuff, and then just there's a twist that we'll get into when we get into more details that happens that just totally took the show in a different direction. I mean, it did and it didn't. It was still the same story, but the story was just, to me, the general narrative of where we thought it was going was just completely overtaken by this sort of internal character arc, deep dive into the whole psyche and what was going on with the personalities of Mark Spector / Stephen Grant. And I was just like, can we get back to the fun adventure thing again? I thought there was a lot of promise in the early episodes. I will say overall, when I look at the 6 episode arc, obviously 6 episodes long makes it a really long movie, but a really short TV series. And I felt, looking at the thing as a whole, I felt too much of episode 1 was wasted on sort of, hey, I've got multiple personalities, and it was like, hey, we got it. Like there was a lot of story time wasted on sort of driving that point home about, we've got this guy with multiple personalities here, and here's all the implications of it, instead of just getting on with the story and getting on with letting us get to know him, instead of just like, hey, he's this guy's got issues. And then likewise episode 5, that took that big turn into the near-death experience that Mark Spector has, where we then learn about, how he got this way, where the multiple personalities came from, his actual, we actually saw the moment that he was sort of dubbed Moon Knight by Khonshu, and all of that. And again, it just completely interrupted the narrative of the overall arc of the show, which was this quest to stop Arthur Harrow from resurrecting, and I'm going to forget the name of the god again. Amet. Yeah, it's so easy to pronounce that I'm almost like, I know it's got to be more syllables than that. But and then it finally kind of came back to it at the end of, in episode 6, I guess. And there was a lot of the climax where that climactic episode where we finally got some of, supervillains fighting superheroes and Moon Knight and all of that. But it felt like too little too late. And it's not that I need, every show has to be this slam bang action smash up thing. I love a lot of the deeper, places where Loki went that were kind of out of this world, where obviously where WandaVision goes is like completely off the wall, but it just sort of fit into this narrative. And for instance, WandaVision had 9 episodes, so they had plenty of time to do all the sort of off the wall stuff while sort of keeping a larger narrative, keeping us grounded in a larger narrative. So let me just pause there and see what other folks think of that. I have a little bit more on a couple of points, but
I can tell you guys my opinion of it. Yeah. I was happy that a lot of my questions were answered. We found out that Mark Spector was the main personality and that Stephen Grant was his alter ego or split personality. I loved Arthur Harrow's character still. I still thought he was so creepy. I thought that it was a really cool transition, like to see him as in the role of the Doctor, and it was like a normal role and he looked normal, more like Ethan Hawkish. And then for him to go back at the end and be creepy Harrow again, I liked that little character change. Trying to think what else. I mean, I love the scenery and the imagery. I loved that it was still set in ancient Egypt. I thought them uncovering the tomb of Alexander the Great was a cool little twist in there too. But I agree with you, Ron. I feel like that next episode 5, kind of went off the rails, and I don't think it needed to be nearly that long to explain it. I think we could have gotten to the point quicker and gotten more to the meat of the story, and I don't know, the battle could have been longer and more intriguing, I feel like, at the end too.
Yeah, I feel like for me the biggest flaws of the show were the relationship between both Stephen Grant and Mark Spector and Layla. I didn't really think either of them had much chemistry, and I was hoping that might change when we saw kind of their backstory. But during that whole long backstory episode 5 that you were just discussing, there's so many. I feel like there's so many almost flashbacks, but it's still kind of Mark narrating what happened, and we don't really see. Like, I would have loved to actually seen the event that Layla's father was killed, and I was excited because one of Moon Knight's longest recurring villains is Bushman, and they mentioned Bushman, and I even saw that there was a Bushman cast on Google when I was looking through the cast, but they never once showed him. They didn't show any of that initial event aside from him crawling up to the statue of Khonshu. So from a comic book perspective, I was really looking forward to seeing that scene, and they didn't really show that, and I feel like that's kind of indicative of that entire episode where they're just kind of with the exception of a few flashbacks that actually show what happened, they mostly are kind of just discussing it, and I've really felt like we lost a lot of that kind of traditional Moon Knight origin story. And speaking of origin stories too, I kind of feel like this whole 6-episode thing is kind of one long origin story, but then there's this whole other story that we didn't see, and it's almost going back through those events that we didn't see as if we had seen them. And there was almost it felt like there needed to be more to kind of establish this backstory that I felt ended up being kind of weak. But in terms of the final battle, and even though I was a little bit confused about how the gods were just instantly knew that it was Harrow.
Yes.
It's like they had that whole
where they didn't know what he was doing the whole beginning of the show.
entire show, and then they had that whole like trial, and they said no, Harrow's not doing anything, and then immediately they're just like, oh, it's Harrow. So it's like obviously they could have easily guessed that it was Harrow, but it's like none of them had any sort of indication or anything like that. Like, so that was a little bit weird, but I did love seeing the giant alligator fight giant skeleton over Egypt, and that whole final battle between Harrow and Moon Knight, where they're like flying across the sky and everything else, I thought was crazy and cool.
I'll say too on the performances. Obviously, Ethan Hawke was great throughout. Oscar Isaac's performance was excellent. Again, I don't know what it is about that guy. He just doesn't do it for me as a lead in this type of genre. So he leaves me a little flat. May, I'm pronouncing her name probably terribly, Callumway, who played Layla. She finally got going. She was great in the third episode when they were sneaking around through the tomb.
Right.
Her action scenes were great. I thought when they turned her into sort of another Avatar sort of superhero of her own at the end, I thought she was great. I'd love to see more of her.
Yeah, she was cool. I loved her suit and her powers and everything else. That was really cool.
Yeah. Although she instantly knew, well, I guess she seemed to instantly know how to do all these things with her.
Right, yeah. Well, I wonder how much of that is just like knowledge you gain when you become an Avatar kind of thing.
Something like that. But that was funny. So then just to go back to the whole, the big turn the show took, like I said, from a narrative standpoint, there was so much promise that we were going to be finally going on this big adventure after they got back to Egypt and Mark started looking into everything. And then, like, even let's touch on a couple things that I know we left out of the last episode. Like, you made the comment that God, why can't I remember that god's name? Amet's whole sort of modus evil plan bore a strong resemblance to Project Insight from Captain America and the Winter Soldier. So we were like intrigued. Well, is this going to come back? And of course, I mean, obviously it was just a theory of ours, but nothing ever surfaced there. I remember there was an offhand reference to Madripoor from the Winter Soldier, Cap and Winter Soldier TV show. And so, maybe we're going to go to Madripoor, or there's going to be some kind of black market thing, and that never materialized. It just all went into this. We're going to see how Mark came to be Mark with the multiple personalities. And to me, so they did that, and so in the sense it was this wacky twist. And I know maybe a lot of people like that the show just took this crazy left turn into that territory. But to me, once they actually did it, it still resembled that episode that's been done in like a million genre shows and cop shows, where here's the episode of the I got knocked out by a rock, or I'm having a near-death experience, and then you go through the dream sequences of the character figuring out, why am I like this or whatever. And I just feel like, really, like that's been done a million times, of like looking into rooms, and in this room I see a little part of my life and that stuff. I mean, it was cool with the whole Ethan Hawke playing the doctor, and how his office resembled the tomb, and and obviously the hippo and the boat riding through the afterlife and all that stuff. Some of the images were cool, but I just felt like it's like, really, like we ditched the whole narrative, like adventure narrative, just to do this kind of typical flashback, figure out my past sequence.
Yeah, I completely agree, Ron. I feel the same way. It was very cliche.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that before. I think it was interesting seeing the two characters go together and interact with each other, in the same space, as opposed to kind of reflections. And that's kind of like a twist on that, and especially because I liked how that episode ended, because it almost like you almost expect that to be his kind of character arc, where he gets rid of Steven, but then it kind of turns it on its head in the next episode and says no, he needs Steven in order to continue to move on. So I think it almost kind of leaned into that like you start out kind of like this typical setup, but then it kind of ends up turning it on its head. I do agree though that it probably could have been a lot shorter. You might have even been able to do that in a single episode and then moved on to the overall arcing story. But yeah, no, I mean I thought it was well done, and I really liked seeing how Oscar Isaac is able to just completely make those two characters like totally different. And I was pretty sad when Steven ended up dying, which I was shocked to kind of have an emotional reaction to that, because it's just Oscar Isaac being himself and like acting against himself. So I thought that was pretty well done.
Yeah, no, you raise a good point. That was a twist on the otherwise kind of generic plot twist with the fact that he ended up, needing both personalities and seeing them interact together. And yeah, I did feel a little bit of a pang. Oh, wow, that Steven character's gone. It's just going to be Mark from now on. So yeah, point taken on those points. Those are good points. So one tease that they did finally deliver on is it was clear that there was a third personality, and then in the teaser, so the end mid-credits scene, they did finally reveal that there was indeed another.
Yeah, I thought was a little bit strange, because it seemed like for something you tease so much during the whole show, you expect it to be important to the actual plot, and then just to have the kind of this post-credit stinger, especially where the villain, I was excited that they didn't kill off Ethan Hawke at the end of the show, because that leaves it open, but then in the stinger they did, so I thought that was kind of strange. And I couldn't tell if that was just that was supposed to be a lead into a season 2, or if that was just kind of oh, it's not over, but kind of leave it open. I'm not sure where they're going to go with that. So and Jake Lockley is another character from the comics that he inherits, another alias. And so it was cool to see that, but I would have liked them to go more into that.
Yeah, so I guess for me, to wrap up my thoughts, I think overall I was hoping for more than we got, but I didn't hate it to the point where, like, if they did come back for a season 2 or something like that, I would go into it sort of fingers crossed that maybe another season would turn into something more. I hate to say like what I was expecting, but I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, now that they've gotten that initial kind of origin over, they can hopefully move more into the superhero kind of vigilante stuff. There was another character I was hoping would show up, Jean-Paul Duchamp, or Frenchie, who's his kind of like confidant. And then when he's I think in the first or second episode, he's like scrolling through that phone that he finds, and you can see Duchamp as one of the contacts. But that's the most that they ever came of that. And I think that's another character that I thought I saw had been cast in the cast list, but never ended up showing up. So I'm wondering if this is another one of those shows where they made some big changes to how it was structured. And I don't know if that was like during the development or during the actual filming or like post-production
right,
kind of thing.
Right. As much as we know, this show didn't seem to have any like COVID-related interruptions or anything like that. It definitely did seem like, especially when we got to the end and when you got to that post-credit scene, it definitely did seem like this doesn't seem like it ended up exactly the way it started out. And I know I read about when Oscar Isaac was cast, he came in with this big, I want to turn this into a character study and blah, 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 blah. Supposedly there was a different direction that they were originally going in, and they decided to go with his direction, which if his direction was this big thing that ended up being the twist in episode 5, then I'm like thumbs down on that. Oscar, you should have went with the original plan. But so I guess I just leave this as disappointed, but liking a lot of the stuff that we sort of got a little bit of. And I love the character, and hopeful if they did do something more with the character, which I'm sure, chances are they probably will, that we get on with the story and get him into some kind of cool adventure or mystery or something. Jen, what are your final thoughts?
I feel the way it ended, there has to be another season coming. There's no way they could leave us all in the lurch like this. Again, I liked it, didn't love it. I would watch the second season. Like I said, I'm assuming it's going to come out. I would definitely watch it. I didn't see any kind of a Marvel connection, like with the greater
good point.
multiverse.
Yeah.
I never saw anything, and again, I'm not probably as attuned to it as you guys are. I'm sure you probably, Cam, as you mentioned, you saw some Easter eggs kind of throughout the whole thing, and led you to believe that they might be introducing other characters. Some comments you made actually while we were watching it made me think that you kind of had some insight. So it might have been something that a regular person like me may have missed, but I didn't see any overall connection to it, and I was a little disappointed. I was hoping to get something to connect it to the rest of the universe.
Yeah, besides, Ron mentioned a couple of them earlier, but there was only like very passing. Well, I mean, the Project Insight wasn't even, that's more just a connection, but they mentioned one location, and that was it, which, I mean, I think they did that on purpose because they really wanted to make this one a standalone kind of its own thing, although it deals with so many big kind of cosmic things, it almost seems like kind of the wrong character to do that with, because now I'm really interested in how all of the Egyptian cosmic stuff fits into the greater MCU, but I do appreciate when they try to not try to weigh it down with connections to other things with like that aren't necessarily needed. And Moon Knight has never had a huge connection to the rest of the Marvel comics in general, so I wasn't like really expecting that, but I definitely think I would like some stronger answers to the questions in terms of how it fits into the cosmology of the MCU.
Yeah, in that sense, this one felt a little bit like one of the Netflix shows that doesn't really have a strong tie to the larger universe.
So some other ideas that I had too, or some thoughts on the show, and I know we all watched this together and kind of had the same idea. The lack of chemistry between Mark and Layla's characters continued into that second segment of Moon Knight. It was brittle. It was a brittle relationship, I felt like. And then that kiss between Stephen Grant and Layla's character, I couldn't.
It was cringy.
Yeah, it was kind of awkward and out of place and too long.
Yeah,
yes, very uncomfortable. I think it was the worst kiss I've ever seen on TV. But some other things that were... another thing I actually didn't care for either is the opening fight scene in episode 4. Like, it left us on this, we don't know what happened to, the character, and then all of a sudden you're back in the desert and it starts up again and they have this ridiculous fight scene. It was really lame.
Yeah, kind of stretched believability. And that, you saying that reminded me too, that episode and a few of the other episodes, they were heavily involved in making the whole show, was directed by these two kind of up-and-coming directors, Aaron Benson and Justin Moorhead, I think their names are. And I've really liked all their kind of previous work, but it's all very similar in that it's very like style over like coherent structure. They did these two movies that are actually very similar to, they kind of did an MCU kind of thing where the first movie is a found footage movie, chronicles this one story, and then their second movie is in the same universe but is almost a separate story, but then kind of provides a little wrap up for their first movie. But both of them are like more kind of just wacky, weird, time travel-y kind of movies as opposed to more like straightforward things. So I wonder how much of that was their influence as well, and when they came onto the show, and how much that had to do with how the show turned out.
Yeah, and that moment that you pointed out, Jen, where Layla and Steven, I guess, roll down the hill and she hides in the truck. It's like there's no way they wouldn't have checked inside the truck, or just shot the truck to pieces. And it just reminded me of a couple of scenes earlier in the show where that just pointed to this weird inconsistency, and I don't know if it has to do again with the direction because some of the action and fight scenes were typical Marvel, really well executed, really well done, but that just seemed like kind of a really just clunky, amateurish, like opening teaser action scene, and there was a couple of others. So it was like there were a few points in the show where it just like weirdly tilted between something that seemed kind of clunky and amateurish to something that seemed very Marvel, very like on point.
Right. I agree, and I think that probably has to do with the fact that they're like relatively new filmmers that have only done like super low budget stuff. And I love that Marvel gets those kind of filmmakers, but I do think sometimes that shows through. But I almost wonder too. I know a lot of the time they have a second team to do action scenes to make sure that they're all like, that's why a lot of the action is really consistent throughout all the Marvel films, because it's a second dedicated team that just goes with the stunt actors and does all the action stuff, and then all of the main actors, and the real director does all the talking and dialogue and that sort of thing. Right.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And it's not always the case. Like, I know James Gunn is heavily involved in all the action scenes and stuff, but a lot, I think, especially for the new directors, they do that for consistency and that kind of stuff. Right, exactly.
There was some things that they actually did very well. The scene where the mummy pulls Layla through the cavern, and then she kind of claws her way back, and then it pulls her back again. That was like really creepy, horror movie-esque. Like, I thought that, like, it was startling. I really liked that scene. I thought that was
when that creepy
well
critter was pulling the guts out of the
that was cool.
One of the cult people.
Yeah, that was, I would say, a horror influence from those directors, I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, that was really cool. It just kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, no, that was a great spot. So that is it. Moon Knight is in the books. We hope to see that maybe it gets turned into something, like maybe he appears in one of the other Disney Plus shows or gets a second season, but we shall see. So that's a wrap on Moon Knight. All right, next up is a highly anticipated film. It's the latest release in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We've been waiting for this one for a long time, Cam. Finally just released over the weekend. We were hoping to get into the theater to see it twice. We didn't quite make that, but definitely feel like I've got enough to be able to give some good reaction to this film. It was directed by Sam Raimi, who did the Spider-Man movies, the original Sony Spider-Man movies back in the early 2000s. He's also very famous as a horror director, Evil Dead 2, and what's the other ones?
Army of Darkness, Drag Me to Hell, and then he's produced a bunch of horror movies too. Actually, none of his horror movies that he's produced have been particularly great, but he has done like the Grudge reboot and the movie The Possession, which was about the Dybbuk box, which was kind of a big deal back in a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so definitely very excited for him to take over this and inject a definite sort of dark horror vibe into the proceedings. So what's your initial reaction?
Going into it, I was a little bit concerned. I wasn't sure how much Sam Raimi we would actually get, especially because it sounded like, based on kind of the leaks and rumors we were hearing, that it had a bit of a, not a troubled production, but they were going back and adjusting things and reshooting things based on the rescheduling and how things panned out in terms of that. So I was a little bit concerned that we wouldn't see a whole lot of Raimi, and I was so shocked at just how much we got. It felt probably like he got the most creative control out of any of the Marvel directors we've seen so far, because his fingerprints were all over this, from the camera work to even the way the story kind of progressed. And in particular, there were a few beats that I won't go into now, but I thought were signature Sam Raimi, and I was really happy that they really leaned into the horror aspect, and I was really surprised at just the level of graphic violence that they were able to pull off for both a Disney movie and a Marvel movie. Not to say that it was particularly gory or anything, but just there's a couple scenes that I thought really stood out and were genuinely pretty freaky, and I think because of that and the overall tone of the movie, I can see some people maybe not being super happy with it, but I left it was a lot to take in, and I would definitely like to see it another time to really solidify my thoughts, but I was really happy with the horror direction and Sam Raimi's influence, so I loved it.
Yeah, I loved it as well. It definitely, I mean, you know, from a filmmaking standpoint, the signatures of Sam Raimi's direction style in more detail than I do, but definitely agree. This overall felt like a movie that wasn't like a typical Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. And I don't mean that to disparage any of the other films. Obviously, we love them all, you know, some more than others, obviously, but there is a signature Marvel style. This movie just felt like it had its own kind of imprint, and definitely the horror elements, I can say it did seem affected by, you know, I could say I can't pinpoint exactly where. There's a couple of things I'll talk about in a little bit. You definitely could tell this movie had reshoots done, I feel like, and We know that based on the reaction to No Way Home, that had some effect on some of the elements that were used in this movie, and contributed to them doing some reshoots. Originally, this was supposed to come out before Spider-Man No Way Home, and there was a lot of COVID delay that affected this film. So some of the reshoots just had to do with sort of reshuffling elements of the story based on what had come out. WandaVision obviously was anticipated to be coming out before this movie, but definitely I think it was supposed to precede No Way Home as opposed to follow it. So I feel like there's moments that you can feel in the film, but just to sit back and enjoy the movie, you can absolutely do that. The whole thing hangs together very well. But if I guess if you're looking for some seams, you can find them. But overall, I loved it.
Yeah, I would say the pacing and structure of the movie kind of indicates a little bit of reshoots, but again, I'm not sure how much of that is them trying to go for a more comic book style, because this felt very much like a comic book, almost in the same way that the Batman did. This feels structured very much like a comic book as opposed to a traditional 3-act film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of that might have been intentional on Sam Raimi's part, although that's just a guess. But there were a couple scenes that stuck out to me as being particularly reshoot-y, and I noticed Wong's hairstyle seemed to really significantly change in between a couple scenes. That was fairly noticeable, but I mean, it didn't really stand out aside from that in any way, but I would be interested in knowing how much was reshoot, or how much of that what we saw was reshot, and what exactly they changed, and that sort of thing, and how much was left on the cutting room floor too. I hope we get to see some deleted scenes eventually.
Yeah, I'd love to see some extras in the DVD. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever see like a director's cut of this movie. Have they done that yet with a Marvel movie? Like allowed a director to release a director's cut?
Yeah, not that I know of. Nope. I think they've all just had their standard cuts, and that's it.
Because I did see Sam Raimi say that the original cut was 3 hours, and there was even some rumors out there that this was going to be one of the longer Marvel movies. So when it was released that the runtime was going to be 2 hours and 6 minutes, I was kind of surprised. I was like, whoa, I thought this was going to, the rumors were that this was going to be longer. So there's a lot to dig into in terms of what happens in this movie, and the fact that they do start to explore the multiverse and some implications there. So there's a lot of Easter eggs in this movie and things that like Marvel fans have been clamoring for, and we'll get into that. I'd just like to start for me, then I'll let you go on some of your deeper thoughts. Just on the performances, overall performances were great. So it was Benedict Cumberbatch, obviously, coming back as Doctor Strange. Benedict Wong as Wong. Yeah, okay. That threw me off there a little bit. And Elizabeth Olsen as the Scarlet Witch. She was fantastic. I thought. Yeah,
she was the standout performance for me.
Yeah, Wong and Cumberbatch were great, but Elizabeth Olsen, I won't say she stole the show, but she was phenomenal in this, and really showed the depth of someone who was has just experienced so much loss in her life that she's just had enough, and she's gonna just kind of try to do things for herself, and yet is also being influenced by these the depth of all this witchcraft that she's gotten herself mixed up in, and it just takes her over. And I thought she did a wonderful job. And then as well, the newcomer Xochitl Gomez as America Chavez, she did a phenomenal job. I can't believe she just turned 16. She definitely seems like a pretty mature actor
against all the other more experienced actors, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
She had a lot of great chemistry. In particular, I mean, even her and Scarlet Witch had some great chemistry, even though that was an antagonistic relationship. But I really liked her and Doctor Strange's relationship, and how they kind of went back and forth, and especially how she immediately ran away from him because she had bad experiences with him in other universes, and I just liked how that grew and developed over the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Their whole thread in terms of him being like, oh, I don't want to get stuck with this kid, and I just have to do what's best for the universe, and her being very obviously skeptical of him based on her experience, traveling through these multiple universes and dealing with other Doctor Stranges. And then by the close of the film, just how kind of devoted he is to her and their sort of relationship, and how she comes to, definitely look at him as a little bit of a father figure. That was a really nice touch that I wasn't familiar with this, but I've heard that sort of sentimental moments are almost kind of a signature of Sam Raimi as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I wasn't familiar at all with America Chavez before. I mean, I'd heard of the character, but I was actually curious to see if they had changed her powers for this movie in any way, because it seemed like they were pretty perfect for the setup and how this movie ended up playing out. But I guess that is pretty much her pretty accurate to her comic counterpart. So that just ended up working out, and I just thought she was a great addition. I don't want to say like MacGuffin, but she really kind of drew the story along. But she had a great character and depth to it as well that worked.
Yeah, and just to get into, and I think folks that listen to us know that, after we give our initial reaction, that we definitely get into spoiler territory and get into the meat of the film. But just in case anyone is not aware of that, we're definitely going to get into that now. And one of the things I wanted to say that was such a surprise to me, because we were, with all the trailers and all the rumors that were out there about this film, it was like, well, which way is it going to go? Is Scarlet Witch going to be the true antagonist of this movie, or would it just be, where they were going through the multiverse, different versions of Wanda Scarlet Witch that were going to cause problems, or was it Doctor Strange that was going to go bad? And so the fact that they so early in the film revealed that, okay, Scarlet Witch is going to be the villain of this film, I was like, whoa, okay, we're going there right away. And then she drops holy hell on Carmitage and attacks all the sorcerers, and she was the source of all of these various monsters and demons that were chasing America Chavez through the multiverse. That was like, wow. And she's totally under the thrall of the Darkhold, and just totally obsessed with the vision of her children that she experienced in Westview, and was just going to do anything she could to get access to the multiverse and rejoin her kids and live with them. That was really, I thought, a great choice, and something I didn't expect, because because Wanda's such a popular character, and while she's went down a little bit of a dark path in WandaVision, she sort of redeemed herself from that, and then just to see her lean back into that again was just absolutely not what I was expecting. And we know that Elizabeth Olsen has signed, I just read, maybe not super recently, but recently, that she signed a 7-year deal with Marvel. So we know she has a future in the cinematic universe, and has definitely established herself as a sympathetic villain, but definitely an antagonist. So it'll be interesting to see where she goes from here.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which way they would be going with the villain. I kind of was expecting Wanda to be more of a cameo, or just kind of like a roadblock, or somewhere in between a helper and a hindrance to them. But I was really surprised, because I kept waiting for them to reveal some greater threat. And obviously she was under the influence of the Darkhold, but I was wondering if there was because there were some rumors that Nightmare would be the villain in this movie, and I think Scott Derrickson initially wanted to use Nightmare as the villain, and with how prominent Dreams were in the first act and really throughout the film, I was kind of thinking maybe Nightmare would be incorporated into this, but no, they went full on villain with Wanda, and I was really happy with that. And because of that, they got to use the full extent of her powers, and they really leaned into the horror elements. So, I mean, Sam Raimi is known for his horror movies, and I loved not only the horror element that he brought, but just the filmmaking that he did, like all the camera turns and the twisty camera angles and the different transitions and crazy overlays and stuff. Like, that's all like classic film kind of techniques that we've never seen in Marvel movies. So that was great. And then there was this whole other horror element where there were jump scares, and then I guess I don't want to talk about the scene before we actually talk about the cameos, but Wanda really gets her. I mean, she destroys Carmitage, and then she really gets this awesome scene where she basically kills some of the most powerful Marvel characters that we've seen so far. So I guess we can get into that now. The cameos.
Yeah. So just to cover off on your last point about this movie, reminded me, like I thought I had heard that Elizabeth Olsen, was going to be pretty much a co-star in this movie, and that it would be very much a sequel to WandaVision in many ways. And this reminded me of like Captain America and the Winter Soldier, where it was a Captain America movie and this was a Doctor Strange movie, but that was Winter Soldier was very much a Captain America and Black Widow film, and this
right.
was the same way, where you could almost equally build them. And I thought that was really cool. So to get into the cameos, so one thing that was teased about this movie is that because we were dealing with the multiverse and alternate versions of Earth, that we would see some characters that have not been introduced in the MCU yet. We would see some indication of the X-Men universe and mutants being brought into the MCU now that the rights to the X-Men characters have returned to Marvel Studios, or are now with Marvel Studios, given that Disney took over Fox and 20th Century Fox. I was blown away by the cameos. Chiefly being Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four.
Specifically John Krasinski.
And specifically the fact that John Krasinski of The Office and Jack Ryan fame and A Quiet Place fame is playing him, because he has been the fan casting for that character in the MCU. For years, people have been begging for him and his wife, Emily Blunt, to play
right. Well, yeah, they're
to play
kind of
Susan Richards. Yeah,
perfect for them. So
yeah, Marvel has not let on at all who they're considering casting for Mr. Fantastic. So to see him show up and have that cameo was incredible, and not to be outdone. With respect to X-Men and mutants, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, was in his hover chair as Professor X of the X-Men, and he also served as one of the Illuminati, this tribunal of superheroes that helped to navigate things in the multiverse. And so to see them come along, we also got Black Bolt, one of the Inhumans, and it was actually played by the actor that who played Black Bolt in the very sad and short-lived Inhumans TV series on ABC. But it was interesting, as much as that show failed, that they brought him back. It's probably sorry we put you into this crappy series, so here you can play Black Bolt in the cameo. And then we also got the return of Peggy Carter, actually playing the character that was teased in the What If animated series, and she played Captain Carter. So in other words, as if she had been given the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers. So we saw her character. We also saw the woman who played Monica Rambeau in the Captain Marvel 2019 Captain Marvel film. She played Captain Marvel, so in this particular version of the multiverse, she became Captain Marvel instead of Carol Danvers. And so that was interesting as well. And they all squared off against Scarlet Witch, and she dusted them all in some pretty gruesome fashion. And she also took over the body of the Wanda that exists in this particular multiverse that they traveled to. And what was very interesting too, in terms of a horror element thing, was how she had taken over this body. So she possessed this other version of Wanda, and this version of Wanda was taking a beating and was bloodied and cut up, and was dragging her feet, and so she became this horrific creature, and she did these pretty horrific things to her when she squared off against the Illuminati. So all of that was crazy.
Yeah, I love that. That whole scene to me was totally like a slasher, like killing spree scene, and they really went as far as they could with the gore. I mean, Black Bolt's death was insane. He just popped his head, and I was shocked that they showed that. And then Peggy Carter got completely cut in half, which, I mean, obviously they didn't show it, but they did show the blood on the thing, and we had never seen anything, the Shield do anything like that before, so that was exciting. And then Reed Richards' death, to me, as soon as John Krasinski showed up, I was like, oh, they're screwed, because I was of the opinion that John Krasinski wouldn't show up at all, or if he did, he would probably end up dying in some fashion, because I think that they won't end up bringing him back, and this was kind of their like fun reference to kind of throw us a bone and say, all right, here's John Krasinski, and now they're hoping to maybe recast Reed Richards as somebody else. That's just my theory. It's also possible they'll bring John Krasinski back. Maybe he'll end up even directing the Fantastic Four movie, which would be pretty cool. But yeah, I loved Reed Richards' death in that scene too. As great or as terrible as it was to see all of these characters die, it was a great scene, and I loved seeing them. And Professor X got a little bit farther than the rest of them, which I appreciated, and they had a little bit more of a mental battle or talk, but he didn't end up making it either, which was
Yeah.
it's kind of sad to see him die, like however many times we've seen him die already, but it's great that he keeps coming back to reprise the part. And yeah, I just love that scene sold it for me. And I could see I haven't really seen a ton of reaction to this online, but I could see people being a little bit upset that they treated those legacy characters so brutally, but I thought that was a fun kind of twist. And
Right.
the one thing I have seen online is people complaining that there wasn't enough cameos, which I mean, I was expecting, based on how many rumors there was, I was expecting maybe a little bit more, but I'm certainly not disappointed with what we got, because it was appropriate for the movie.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the disappointment that you've seen in some of the online reaction about the cameos too. But I was just like, there were so many cameo rumors, and I'm like, I just went in thinking, okay, if there's a rumor of, 15 cameos, you're only going to get a third of that. I was just like, you just can't possibly do that. And
Right.
but it's funny, the reaction to Krasinski, that as soon as I saw him appear, I was like, oh shit. And I was like, okay, so that's our Reed Richards. And I was like, as soon as I saw him, I was like, okay, so they're going with Krasinski as Reed Richards. And you had the exact opposite reaction, to say was, okay, here's your fan casting, your fan service of Reed Richards, and now we're going to do what we want to do when we actually go around to getting to the movie. So who knows? The rumors persist out there that say, oh, maybe he's going to direct Fantastic Four, and that's why John Watts stepped down, or whoever. But
Right.
we'll see. But yeah, that was all fantastic. In a way, too, that section in Act 2 of the film also had some of that. That's where you might experience some of that feeling where things were reshot and sort of tied together in post production. It was one thing that was interesting that I just have never seen. I don't recall seeing in a MCU movie, and I don't know whether this is a Sam Raimi thing or just something where it was the first time where we saw, like, when Doctor Strange was explaining just how off the rails Wanda had gotten in his universe to try to convince the Illuminati that you guys are in big trouble. They interspersed that with scenes of Wanda figuring out how to dream walk and how to travel into the multiverse using the Darkhold. And so it was like a split screen, and they were showing her on one side of the screen doing something while Strange's voiceover is explaining, you guys don't understand, she's coming and it's going to be ugly. And I've never seen that done in a Marvel movie before, and I was almost like, was this a way to sort of like, was that a technique they used to sort of condense those plot points and get it across? But that was just something interesting, and I didn't like or dislike it. It's just something I don't recall seeing, that kind of split screen of like, here's what someone's doing over here while somebody else is talking about it over here.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think there's probably a technique for that. You might even call it like a montage or something. But yeah, or a phrase for that rather. But that's totally a Sam Raimi thing. Like, you see that in the Spider-Man movies to a lesser extent. But like when he's training and stuff, that's more of a montage with music. But there is some of that. And to me that's just more of a, Sam Raimi loves those kind of classic cinematic kind of visual storytelling kind of things, which you don't not to, again, yeah, like what you said, not to disparage the Marvel movies, but they're very made, for the most part, very straightforward, very traditionally, and I think a lot of that too has to do with the fact that they're distributed internationally. A friend of mine actually pointed out that he hasn't been super happy with the dialogue in the Marvel movies lately, and I have to agree with him. I think it's been a little bit dry and generic, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're translating it into all these different languages. So I think I wonder how much of an effect that has to the fact that they're distributing it internationally to all these different countries, and they have to kind of take that into account when structuring the movie too. But I really liked how this one kind of broke the mold a little bit, and they gave Sam Raimi that creative control to do some more kind of crazy, kooky filmmaking techniques.
All right. So we'll hit the post-credits scenes before we wrap up. But any other final thoughts you want to throw in?
Not really. I would say I would say the visuals were very spotty, like, and I think this probably has to do with the production, but like some of it looked incredible, and like obviously I love all of the crazy multiverse traveling visuals, like all of the when there were paint and cartoons and everything else, that was incredible. But like with all the Marvel movies, there were some pretty spotty like green screen background effects occasionally, and I
Yeah,
feel like
especially during the cameos, I noticed that. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's it. I would say the other kind of negative thing I have is, especially in regards to Krasinski, I almost wonder how much those cameos were changed as this film was in production, because I think it's especially with that format where they're in that council chamber and each one of them is separated in a chair. I think it's really easy to film someone separately and pop them in. But I would say that scene felt I almost because John Krasinski seemed like he was almost acting like towards a wall, like he wasn't really bouncing off of anyone. At least that's how I felt, and I wonder how much of that was like replacing different people. Like the presence of the Ultron bots almost indicates maybe Iron Man was on the Illuminati at one point, and then Iron Man is on the Illuminati in the comics, and we don't. And Peggy Carter could have been a last minute thing, so who knows? So I would say that felt a little bit wonky, but I've stopped really caring about the quality of special effects because ultimately, as long as I get the story and get the what's happening, it doesn't really matter.
Right, and they're overall so great that if there's little flaws here and there.
There's so they have so much work to do that it's like you have to just appreciate what they can do.
Yeah, so my last thought just before we get into the post-credit scenes is just so it was interestingly a pretty definitive end for Wanda. She ended herself and destroyed the Darkhold in every universe. So it makes for a very big question mark as to how she's going to return, but we know she's definitely going to return. I've even heard about she said as far as she knows, she's not going to be in that Agatha Harkness series, but there's the possibility of another Disney Plus show with focusing on Wanda, and and like I said, we know she signed that contract, so she's definitely going to be back. One other thing too is I was kind of, and harking back to cameos a little bit, I thought Vision might show up. In this film, because we know that essentially the original Vision's personality has inhabited that white Vision that was created by Sword, and that so Vision is out there somewhere, and where is he, and when are we going to see him again? Was an interesting thought. But so then on to post-credit scenes, which the main mid-credit scene, which was the main sort of tag on the end of the movie, was a little bit disappointing, I would say.
I have to agree. And I was telling you earlier, my friend made a good point. He thinks it's the first one that he would say is genuinely bad, because I'd have to agree. It really undercuts the end of the movie, especially like that end. That kind of classic, everything is okay until the very last second kind of ending is very Sam Raimi. It happens in all the Evil Dead movies, and Drag Me to Hell as a great kind of shocking ending like that. So he loves that, and that's a great kind of way to end it. But then in the post-credit scene, he's walking along the road, and the third eye pops out from his head, and at the very end of movie, it seems like that seems to be something he might need to learn how to control, or it might be a negative thing. But then in this post-credit scene, after Charlize Theron jumps out in her crazy Power Ranger armor, his third eye just comes up and he seems to have control of it. So I get the sense that this post-credit scene is almost like this is what's coming, but we have such a little idea of what we're actually going to do that we just threw this together and just as a general idea of what the next movie is going to be like. Because I can't imagine that the way they're going to introduce this seemingly fairly important character is she's just going to jump out and say, "Hey, come with me. We got to go on an adventure together."
Yeah, right. Yeah, it seemed like the most throwaway of the most of the mid-credit scenes, especially which are usually the more juicy ones. They seem so deliberate and so much thought put into them, and this one just seemed kind of like a last-minute plug-in sort of thing.
Almost like they didn't have anything, and they were just like, "Okay, we know we're going to use this character. We've cast Charlize Theron, and just put her in for a second." And it looked a little bit kind of last minute.
Yep. All right. So that is a wrap on Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. The only other tag-on thought I have, not only did this feel cinematically like a movie that was not typical MCU, and that's a compliment, that's a good thing. As much as I thought this was going to be the movie, more so than No Way Home, that was going to sort of set up, the larger MCU narrative, it felt pretty standalone. We didn't get a lot of implications of how this is going to affect other Avengers that are out there or anything else. So we're still sort of waiting for that. There's typically in the, this is now phase 4. In each of the previous phases, there's typically one or two movies that sort of carry the torch for the larger story that they're building up to. And then some of them are more standalone. This one, again, felt very standalone. So I feel like I'm still waiting to see where is the larger MCU narrative. What like major sort of big bad are we building up to, or whatever. But I guess we'll have to see if maybe Thor will be the answer to that question.
Yeah, looking forward to Thor and Miss Marvel are the next two MCU things coming up.
Yep. So yeah, Miss Marvel's coming up next month, I think, or soon. That's a Disney Plus show. We'll definitely review that. Stranger Things is coming up. Thor is coming up. Probably Obi-Wan. Next is Obi-Wan. That's going to be coming up on Disney Plus. We'll definitely be spending some time on that. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us on Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron, and we will be back.
See you next time, guys.